Привет всем! С вами я, Janey, и это How Janey Learned Russian, and you can too. I interrupt your regular programming on the cases that go along with my textbook with some very exciting news, which is March 1st is spring in Russia. I mean, it's still cold here, but according to my allergies and my sniffly nose, which you'll probably hear over the course of the video, I may even sneeze. Watch till the end to see if I sneeze. Spring is upon us, and I hope that comes with new motivation. So I interrupt the regular programming to take a week devoted to verbs. Why? Why verbs? Because I finished my textbook on verbs. So you already know my textbook, Russian Cases, made slightly less scary. And now we have Russian verbs made logical. I bet you didn't realize these verbs, Russian verbs, are logical. There's like a system that you can predict how they work and slightly less scary. So today you're going to be taking a quiz to find out, do you in fact know Russian verbs as well as you think you do? Maybe you think you've got it all figured out and you don't even need to spend any time on the verbs. And bless your heart, that's good for you, but you could also be not aware, as like you may not know them quite as well as you think you do. It's okay. We've all been there. We've all done that. In fact, I still am making sense of Russian verbs. So today's quiz is going to be based on some of the content that is in the book. I'm really excited about this book. I've been meaning to make it for years, and I finally got it done. And let's just go ahead and preview some of the things that you're going to see in it. So if we come over here and you can start kind of scrolling through it, I'm really pleased with just some of the fun stuff. So all throughout this book, we're looking at memes. We're, kind of making sense of memes, bringing it to life with humor. As always, it's like maximum language nerdery. I'm always going to be a huge nerd in my textbooks. But what's going to happen is we're going to be talking about this, the hamburger, which I've done an entire video on. And in fact, as you can see, anytime there's an accompanying video for one of these worksheets, I hyperlink it in the PDF. So that's why this one's an ebook, because a lot of these worksheets match up with a video that I've already done. So we're going to go over the hamburger. We're also going to talk about verb stress, okay? And I'll talk about it today in the quiz. Like, do you know where the stress on this verb conjugation should be? And guess what? You don't have to guess. There's a system in place. If you know the system, you never have to guess ever again. Isn't that great? Also, we go into verbs of motion, which are very tricky. I have a whole section on verbs of motion. We don't go into all of them, but we focus on the key 6. We also talk about verbal aspect, which for many of you who are probably in the beginning or intermediate levels, you may not even know what verbal aspect is. And I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's actually quite complex. But there is logic to it. And don't you worry, this textbook will make them slightly less scary, as promised. Then we start into one of my most favorite things in Russian, which is prefixes and roots of words. So we do a whole root study in here. I lay out the prefixes, kind of show you how they work, and then what happens when we put these prefixes onto verbs of motion, which is just like this magical world unfurls before your eyes. It's so magical. And then, it wouldn't be How Janey Learned Russian without music and songs, of course. So as you can see at the end of the textbook, I have all these different songs. And then after each song, I give you the opportunity to do a verb study of the verbs that were in that song. So I'm saying, okay, apply all the skills you've learned throughout this textbook and practice conjugating these verbs based on your knowledge of the verb conjugation burger and how there really aren't very many surprises when it comes to verb conjugations in Russian. So yeah, by the end of this book, you should be able to make a big, beautiful mental chart in your head, or like an actual physical chart if you choose to, of like everything you need to know about a Russian verb. Because there's, like I said, there's actually, as you can see from this picture, there's kind of more to it than you maybe are aware of at your beginning or intermediate level. So that's what this book is all about. Okay, so now let's find out, do you know Russian verbs? Let's go ahead and start. By the way, there will be a promo code for 20% off the book at the end of the video. So you got to watch my stupid face for the whole video. I'm sorry about that. Like you can just blur that part of the screen if you need to, or just kind of cut it off so you don't have to see it, or just listen, right? I do have a face for radio. You can just listen to it if you want. Stay with me. Let's go ahead and get started on our quiz. Okay. So like I said, each of these questions is going to touch upon something that gets talked about in the book. So if you get any of these wrong, you might go, okay, so I do have some work to do. Maybe I need to go over and purchase this handy dandy new book that Janey wrote for me. So let's go ahead and start the quiz. Are you ready? Хорошо. Вот, quiz time. Okay, вопрос номер один. Okay, so I picked a very random verb that you may not know. Махать. Okay, махать. Okay, so even if you don't know what this verb means, you should still be able to conjugate it. You should still be able to conjugate it. Once you know at least two of the conjugations, you can apply the logical system of Russian verb conjugations and figure out how to conjugate the rest. Okay? So, get ready for the answers. I'm about to reveal it all to you. Okay. Once you know at least two of the conjugations, and sometimes even just with one of the conjugations, you can start to guess the rest. Я машу, ты машешь, он машет, мы машем, вы машете, они машут. Вот так. Вот так. You will learn all about this system and this conjugation burger, is what I call it, all in my book. And you'll get lots of practice doing this kind of thing where I provide you with two of the conjugations, and then you use that logical little brain of yours and figure out the rest of the conjugations. Okay, вопрос номер два. Okay, so this is a fun thing. In fact, in Russian, amongst Russians, this is considered, you're kind of considered uneducated if you say this verb like this. If you say могут, this is kind of like, oh, he said used to could. Oh, geez, you know, like you're like, oh, that's not how you say that. So there are Russians who put the stress on this wrong, and other Russians look down on them as like less educated than they are. Okay, so this is stress is wrong. Могут. Why is this wrong? You're going to learn all about verb stress in this textbook. And this is what's called bounce back stress, okay? So there's three verb stress patterns, and this one is the bounce back verb stress pattern. So because we say я могу, that's maybe why this got stuck in your head, okay? But there's never a scenario in which you would have the stress on the final syllable in я and on the они, but not on the ты, он, okay? So let's listen to this verb stress. It goes, я могу, ты можешь, он может. So you've been saying может быть. You're not saying может быть. You're saying может быть. So that tells you, the second you know я могу and может быть, well, you know it's a bounce back verb stress pattern. Я могу, ты можешь, он может, мы можем, вы можете, они могут. Они могут. Вот. So you do not say могут, although there are even Russians who say it like that, and they are not as well versed on Russian verb stress as you may be. So, хорошо. Следующий вопрос. Oh, so many students conjugate with these type of verbs. Are you ready? Планировать. How to conjugate this verb. Планировать. What do you think? Планировать. Okay. I'm about to reveal the answers. You pause the video if you really want to work this through. Are you ready? Here we go. Я планирую. Ты планируешь. Он планирует. Мы планируем. Вы планируете. Они планируют. And guess what? Sure enough, in my textbook, I go over these weird verbs. I go over them, okay? So all that verbs do their own thing. And this is one of those things you just have to memorize and practice. And there's lots of practice of this in my textbook. Хорошо. Вопрос номер 4. So notice the strategic juxtaposition of an all that and an avait. And students often confuse these. And again, in my textbook, I have you practice both. So conjugate this verb now. Okay, so go ahead. If you really want to work through this, pause the screen and really try and figure it out. Again, don't be cheating. Because like I said, by the end of this textbook, you won't need to cheat because you'll understand the logic behind all of it, the patterns behind all of it. And so you can make extremely educated and most likely informed guesses, or correct guesses most of the time. Here we go. Okay, get ready for the answers. Я перестаю. Ты перестаешь. Он перестает. Мы перестаем. Вы перестаете. Они перестают. Okay, so even though we can't necessarily guess conjugations based on the infinitive, we can start to notice that we can notice kind of a group of verbs that all kinds of does the same thing. And I talk about it in the textbook. Вопрос номер 5. This is interesting. Having is so tricky in Russian, right? So how would you say I have a big house? Okay, so remember, it's kind of weird in Russian. Okay, so think about that. We'll go over it here in a second. So how would you say I have a big house? Next, let's take it up a notch. How would you say I had a big house? This is where students start to go, oh, I haven't thought about that one. And sure enough, it's all in the textbook. Okay, now it's about to get really wacko. You ready? I want to have a big house. Whoa, how do you do that, right? Like this is one of those things that like we don't notice this big gap in our knowledge until we try to go and say something like that. And then we're like, well, crap, I don't know. You know, one time I heard a student, bless his heart. So to say I have a big house, у меня есть большой дом, okay? Bless his heart, he thought like, okay, well, I'll just do the past tense of есть. So one time he said, у меня ел большой дом. Which is very creative and very resourceful, but that means like a big house was eating at me. Like, yeah, so no. So to say have in past tense, we use быть. And then быть changes depending on the gender of the thing you had. So to say I had a big house, we would need to say у меня был большой дом. And then, okay, once we need to put to have into the infinitive because we're combining it with another verb, now we have to use a different verb. We have to use иметь. And then the thing you have is going to get accusative case. Я хочу иметь большой дом. So in the textbook, I walk you through when should we be using the у меня construction and when should we be using иметь construction. Okay, хорошо. Следующий вопрос. This is a mistake I hear all the time from students. Как сказать? So which one is correct? Я знаю по-русски или я знаю русский? I hear that students confusing these all the time. So there's a whole chapter about kind of verb usage, like how to choose the correct verb in certain situations. So not just conjugations, not just verbal aspect, but also like why do we use certain verbs sometimes? Or sometimes we think we need a verb and we don't actually even need a verb, right? Like to have. Okay, so the answer is я знаю русский. Я знаю русский. Okay, so the verb or the book lays out when do you get по-русски versus русский or по-английски versus английский, etc. There's a whole section on that. Okay, next one. Which one is correct? Я иду в Калифорнию. Я хожу в Калифорнию. Я еду в Калифорнию. Interesting. I mean, technically all of them are correct, but like two of them you're going to sound like a weirdo. Okay? People are going to be like, "What?" Okay? So which one is correct? These are verbs of motion. This is that super annoying concept of just why is to go so complicated in Russian. So the correct answer is я еду в Калифорнию. Я еду в Калифорнию. Because the first two are by foot verbs, okay? And most likely you don't walk to California. I mean, I guess maybe if you're just across the border and you're like, hey, look at me, I'm walking to California. But no, like you sound like a weirdo if you say that. Okay? Я еду в Калифорнию. So in the book, I lay all of that out. We go over to go by foot, to go by vehicle. We go over to fly, to run, to swim, and to кататься, which means like to ride or roll along on something. Okay, следующий вопрос. Why is this, what's wrong in this dialogue? Okay, tell me what's wrong. Что ты делал вчера? And then he says, Я шел на концерт. So this is, the previous question was about to go in present tense. Now we have to go in past tense, to went, right? So went. Went is also extremely tricky in Russian. And that's all in the textbook. So let me explain this to you. Я шел на концерт would be like saying, I was walking to the concert, right? And so your listener's going to go, and, right? It just sounds really kind of funny. Now in Russian, when you go somewhere, we have to take into account, did you come back from there? So this one should be, Я ходил на концерт. And this is all laid out in the textbook. And then remember, each of these worksheets, maybe you've seen some of the videos I've done on these in the past. As you go through the PDF, if it has a video about it that I've made at some point, it's hyperlinked in the PDF. So you'll just click on the title of the worksheet and it'll take you to the YouTube video. Okay, so this next question is about verbal aspect, okay? Which again, most of you, it's very, very possible you are somewhat oblivious to verbal aspect because unlike the cases, it doesn't really affect people's ability to understand you, whereas the cases do. But people are probably noticing at this point in your Russian that, geez, it feels like every time I say a verb, a Russian like stops me and says it in a slightly different way. Like, what's up with that, right? Why can't I just say a verb without, being corrected? Well, most likely you're using the wrong aspect, okay? So this is a situation with verbal aspect, which I go into great detail on in the textbook. So what's wrong with this? I'm trying to say here, my parents never say I love you. So, okay, well, сказать means say, right? So I'm thinking I go, мои родители никогда не скажут я люблю тебя. Да? Мои родители никогда не скажут я люблю тебя. So we think, an uninformed learner thinks they're saying, my parents never say I love you. Actually, what you just said is my parents will never say I love you. What it should be is мои родители никогда не говорят я люблю тебя because of verbal aspect. And you'll learn all about that in the book. Okay, хорошо. More on verbal aspect. Did you know every time you're learning a Russian verb, most Russian verbs, I'd say 92.37654%. I'm really good at statistics and numbers. Don't fact check me on that. Almost all verbs in Russian have two versions of themselves, okay? So these verbs you may be familiar with. Did you know that they have a perfective counterpart, right? So вставать is one way of saying to wake up. Понимать is one way of saying to understand. Брать is one way of saying to take. Нравится is one way of saying to like. All of these have a partner. Do you know what their partner is? And sure enough, this will be covered in the textbook. So, are you ready for the answers? Let's find out. Вставать is the imperfective. Встать is the perfective. Понимать is the imperfective. Понять is the perfective. That's why we say when we understood something, we say, поняла, хорошо, понял, поняла, вот, right? So those are actually twins. Those are twins. They're just two sides of the same verb. Брать. We hear взять, да? Откуда ты взял, да? But did you know it's the exact same thing? If you look up both брать and взять in Google Translate, they're both going to say to take, right? They're just two sides of the same verb. Нравится, понравится, да? Нравится, понравится. Okay, вопрос номер 10, and this was my favorite section of the book because I love prefixes. Ходить. Okay? On the count of 3, you're going to come up with at least 10 verbs derived from this verb, and each verb should still have the ходить in it. Can you do it? By the end of my textbook, you'll be able to do this like bam, bam, bams. Okay? Bams. I say that, by the way, that's what a Russian friend used to say. He'd be like, I'm going to hit him like bams. So now me and my kids, that's a family tradition. Instead of bam, we say bams. Okay. Ходить. И поехали. Think of 10 verbs. Don't change anything else. Keep ходить. All you can do is come up with prefixes. You ready? 10. Go. Pause the video because I'm about to spoil it. Okay, here we go. Входить, выходить, заходить, находить, исходить, происходить, превосходить. I'm trying to think of the ones. Приходить, восходить, уходить. Еще как переходить. Еще какие-то там есть. Подходить. Вот, еще какие-то. Отходить. Исходить я уже сказала. Доходить. Расходить. Вот, видите? So there's a whole bunch, and in the textbook, I lay out all those prefixes and kind of give you examples of how that prefix changes the meaning of them. And then in our next quiz later in the week, you'll learn about like these prefix verbs of motion. They are super fun, and you've probably been saying them all along, but you weren't necessarily aware of the whole system that exists. Again, they're all very logical, very organized and beautiful and logical. And once you start to be aware of the system, you can start to predict when you see a new verb, you can start to kind of get a feel for how it's gonna be. So tell me how you did on the quiz. Are you a bidnyashka when it comes to verbs? If you are, guess what? I have a textbook to help you with that. And you can get 20% off because you watched all the way until the end of the video. And that promo code is I love verbs, because I know you do. And if you don't yet, you will love them by the end of the textbook. So head on over to Patreon. The link is in the description box below, and get your copy of Russian Verbs made logical and slightly less scary. Хорошо, это все на сегодня. I'll be back on Thursday for another quiz on verbs, just to see, do you know verbs as well as you think you do? Хорошо, это все на сегодня. Пока-пока.